mystery parliament session called by the Modi government later this month continues to keep Indians in the power corridors of the country agog. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. The one nation, one election narrative has returned to dominate the headlines. Former President Ram Nath Kovind will be heading a panel to explore the feasibility of holding simultaneous elections. But this is a complicated process, and can it really be completed and executed in a 5-day special session of Parliament? All of this is being asked as the government suddenly announced the decision to convene a special session of the Parliament later this month. This on a day when the Adani Hindenburg dispute had returned to the headlines and the opposition's India alliance was meeting in Maharashtra. It was the perfect headline ouster. By evening, channels and programs like ours were only looking at the speculation of an early election. But beyond the trademark clever headline sort of management and play of the BJP, what is really at the heart of this debate? Till 1967, India indeed used to hold simultaneous elections to the Lok Sabha and the assemblies. But to execute this now would A, need the consent, I believe, and lawyers can correct me if I'm wrong, of at least 50% of India's state assemblies. And B, it would necessitate state assemblies being ready to have their tenures either shortened or advanced. How else could the calendar be synchronized? The larger political question is, why would the Modi government need this? And is that really what this special session is about? To try and decode the mystery, let's introduce our special panel of experts and very, very interesting analysts and guests that we have for you today. We're joined first up by Dilip Cherian, one of the country's foremost brand gurus and image consultants. It's good to see you, Dilip. Also joining us on our program for the very first time, so a special welcome to her is Aditi Phadnis, one of India's senior most journalists and columnists. Good to have you with us, ma'am. Also joining us on the program today is senior advocate Sanjoy Ghosh. Good to see you as always, Sanjoy. And also joining us after a long gap, I don't know why that gap has been there, Sandip Ghosh. Welcome back to the program. And also joining us is political analyst, back with us today, Anurag Naidu. Namaskar and good to see you. I want to remind everybody here that this headline of the One Nation, One Election has coincided with the India Alliance meeting in Maharashtra. And as I said, that headline has been displaced by this headline. Before we play out for you what the Prime Minister has consistently been saying on this issue, Dilip, let me actually start with you. You're in the business of advising clients on how to manage narratives, brands, how to project themselves. In terms of headline management, the government has obviously been smart in a Machiavellian way. Started yesterday with Adani Hindenburg. It ended with only the special session in the headlines. Do you think that was the aim, or do you think the aim runs deeper?
I think the aim runs deeper to ascribe either great fear or great anxiety with the Modi government about the Adani report is to place a lot of responsibility with people taking this decision, saying that it needs to be ousted. So far, that's not the narrative they've been playing to. So the second thing to keep in mind is that what is closer to this September session, the September session is much, much closer to the state elections. Whatever the complications about one nation, one election, I think that's far too complicated for a 5-day session to deal with unless it's dealt with in some perfunctory manner and bludgeoned through, in which case it can be done even in a 1-day session. So I suspect that there must be more in terms of marketing savvy that goes behind this kind of decision. It cannot just be that we want to advance polls, we want to have it on 1 day, 1 date, or 2 dates, or whatever it is, because I think that will probably run up against a whole bunch of bigger complications than even a comparatively complex legislation like pushing through the UCC would be.
So, what's your best guess before I open this up? I agree with you. I am not convinced, but I've often been wrong, and I will humbly admit I've often been wrong. I am not convinced that a legislation as complex as the one nation, one election bill can go through as easily. Even if we go through Parliament, there's a whole sort of long process to actually make it real. What's your best guess? Some have suggested uniform civil code, another very complex proposal, could also antagonize Hindu voters in sections of the country. Some have said it could be, the G20 meet would have been over. You want Parliament to actually talk about what you've achieved on the global stage. What is your best guess, Dilip? And then I'll open up with the same question for everybody else.
Again, I'm going to answer this one with a question. Normally, I don't. Could it be the women's reservation bill, which would give them an unbeatable advantage as they go into elections?
Yes.
Both these are actually stuck in various House committees. So, if you want to actually do a session and cut through all the so-called processes, procedures, and rigors of parliamentary process, only then would any of these things be possible. To do this, just to do rah-rah about either Chandrayaan or G20, I think is not likely. You could do that far better with an address to the nation.
I think the women's reservation bill is a very interesting thought. It's been on low simmer since I became a journalist some 23, 25 years ago. And if the Modi government were to, were to sort of enforce it to the last mile, there would be many hurrahs and it would be like a sort of perfect brand positioning. Aditi Phadnis, is that what you might think with all your years of experience and understand politics? Is that what we're looking at? Have all the channels got it wrong by obsessing over one nation, one election?
Well, the fact is, let's do this systematically. The fact is that one nation, one election has been referred to a committee. That's a favorite route of governments to basically. I mean, I know the committee is headed by the former president of India, but I don't think a committee can give its report in like 15 days. So, and there are lots of complications in the one nation, one election story. The constitutional amendment has to be, many constitutional amendments have to be tabled and passed. They then have to be ratified by various state governments, by all the state governments actually. And then there are other issues like how to address the anti-defection law if a government falls in between sessions, what happens then? So I don't think one nation, one election is the agenda is for a 5 day session. Certainly, G20 Parliament has to be informed what happened in G20. It has to be done judiciously because, as we know, no discussion has taken place on Chinese aggression on India. So you have to kind of bypass that and explain why Xi Jinping is not attending the G20 summit, etc. So I guess that will take a certain amount of calibration. Apart from that, there are a number of other legislations which have not been passed in the last session. Those have to be done. Barkha, we have to keep in mind that if a parliament session is held, first of all, no confidence motion can be tabled. Also, no parliament session needs to be held for 6 months after a parliament session is held in that year. So the constitution requires that parliament sessions take place once every 6 months. So if you have a special session now where you do some legislative business, you really don't have to do anything, and it frees you up for campaigning duties for the next 6 months, with possibly a short vote on account done sometime closer to the elections. So, I mean, I don't know what the government's agenda is. We should hear about that very soon. But I'm not sure if one nation, one election is the reason why this special session has been called.
So that's two of our experts already thinking that this is nothing to do with one nation, one election. And my instinct also tells me that it's just too complicated and there are not enough electoral gains by simply moving a legislation that you can't see through to the last mile. Sandip Ghosh, as a fan of the Prime Minister, but a sometime critic or a sometime skeptic of the government's decisions, what do you think is going on? Can we unmute Sandip, please? Sandip, are you unmuted at your end? Just unmute yourself if you are.
No, it's very difficult to guess what this government thinks or the Prime Minister thinks. I've been seeing reports saying sources close to the government. And as we know, in this case, the closest you are to the church, the farthest you are from the God. People
Yeah.
don't get to know that. So first of all, I take your point about headline buster. I think that's a very interesting thing. Second thing I'd add to that, there are some balloons being floated. Both these things, coming out. I totally agree with the analysis of Dilip and Aditi that you cannot push through one nation, one election in 5 days' time, but you can probably seed the idea just like they have done UCC and actually formally refer it to a committee or something. I'm not clear. Sanjay may be able to say whether there is a remote possibility of using this by referring it to a committee and to some extent instead of preponing election and bringing it advancing it, whether there can be a possibility of delaying it. I don't know whether those sort of calculations could be there, but
Hmm.
personally I don't think beyond floating a balloon, today's announcement of appointing Mr. Kovind can go any further. Other bits about women's legislation, etc., all those are points, but to expect everything to go through in 5 days, I think it's a tall order.
So you also think that you don't know what else is going on, but you agree that other than just showing political intent by announcing a former president's name to head this committee, and by the way, this is not the first committee. You're seeing on your screen excerpts of what the Law Commission, headed by Justice Chauhan, said about One Nation, One Bill in 2018, and none of us seem to think that the Parliament session is actually about this. So we'll be feeling mighty stupid if it turns out to be about this when when D-Day comes. Sanjoy, Ghosh, let me bring you in. What do you think is going on? And if it is one nation, one election, I must ask you up front. Justice Chauhan, who headed the Law Commission in 2018, provided three options for this to happen. He said, you can either change the schedule of state advance or postpone the elections in state assemblies, the life of a state legislative assembly. You can hold elections twice in 5 years. And he said if there's no political consensus, you can club in a given year the state assemblies and the general elections. This last point, of course, has led to wide speculation about whether the government might want to hold an early election. But on a point of law, the Law Commission also said 5 constitutional amendments would be needed. Would these constitutional amendments need the ratification of at least 50% of state assemblies, or would they not?
Well, thank you, Barkha, for having me. And with this government, it's always interesting. There's no boring moment. We are always guessing and we are always being amazed at what they end up doing. Now, so far as the women's reservation bill is concerned, while I would be very happy if this was the case, but please keep in mind that the women's reservation bill has already been passed by the Rajya Sabha. So therefore, both houses have been summoned. So they must be up to something. Otherwise, they would simply just summon the Lok Sabha because it only requires the Lok Sabha to pass it, and then the bill can be sent to the president. Now, so far as one nation, one election, etc. are concerned, as you rightly said, that there was a trial balloon floated through the Law Commission in 2018, under the chairmanship of Justice Chauhan, and various options were thrown up in the air. One of them was that certain assemblies like Delhi and Haryana, you could bring forward the elections, and some of the assemblies like Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, you extend the term or precedence rule and you have them together, or you have elections once a year. To answer your question, the Law Commission itself said that state ratification is not required, and strangely so under Article 368(2), just changing the terms of the assembly might not strictly require the assent of the states. However, since we are doing conspiracy theories, let me throw in another one. Even Justice Chauhan was cognizant, and we are all cognizant, that even in this one nation, one election thing, in a parliamentary democracy where you have a chief minister at the helm of the state and the prime minister at the helm of the nation, you have governments which will fall. So what happens if a government falls? And even Chauhan says that, if there is some time left, you have another election for the remaining period, etc. But one of the options could be, though of course the Supreme Court in Kuldeep Nair's case has said that the parliamentary system of India is part of the basic feature of the constitution. But one of the things, while we are at a conspiracy theory, why not, is toying with the idea of making India a presidential system of government and have the chief minister or replacing the governor and the prime minister replacing the president, and have that kind of a system, and that will completely change the entire dynamics of the process. Of course, that might require state ratification.
Yes. So can I ask you, because I need to correct myself, because my understanding was that to move towards simultaneous polls would need state ratification. You are saying that it would not.
No, it would not, because you see, Article 368.
It's a very important point, because it suddenly makes a very complicated thing very easy to do in 5 days. So maybe we need to revisit our feelings. Sandip, you wanted a brief introduction?
Sanjay, question to you. Say,
Yes.
one is extending the current, the tenure of current assemblies which are expiring earlier. What about if you're shortening the thing? A chief minister can turn around and say that, you are truncating my term, because it's my prerogative to when to, call for the elections. They can go to court and,
Absolutely.
prevent that.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. See, one way of doing it in old days, when the courts were very, very hesitant to interfere, would be simply to impose precedence rule in those states, right? And by the time the precedence rule issue would be settled, you would already have your one election and everything would be over. And courts would be reluctant to interfere. So you see, curtailing is not a problem. Extending is a problem, because extending requires a constitutional amendment. Curtailing is simply you can use your power.
But the moment you don't need state assembly ratification, then this is something that can be done in a 5-day session.
It can be done. It can be
No,
done.
but you see, if you try to impose precedence rule in those states which are not due for elections, it'll open another Pandora's box. Precedence rule just cannot be imposed at will.
No,
Then
he's right. In fact, as I said, and he's right, after Bombay's case and several judgments, including the latest one in Maharashtra, the courts are very, very active in inspecting what are the circumstances which went into in imposing the precedence rule. So he's right to an extent that may require also a constitutional amendment to curtail specifically for this particular assembly. And unfortunately, my interpretation, I'm subject to correction, is that even that does not require state ratification.
Okay, so I really have to first say that I stand corrected, because I really did think that these were amendments that needed state ratification. And Sandip Ghosh has raised some very important points. Anurag, give me a second. I saw Aditi had an interjection. Aditi, Phadnis, please go ahead.
Look, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that if you want to dismiss a state government on whatever grounds, it's not so easy to do it. So I really don't understand how the central government can simply go ahead and say, listen, you are not falling in with our plans, and so I'm dismissing your government. There are clear-cut rules on the grounds of which you can dismiss state governments. You can't just dismiss them because they're inconvenient.
Yes, and I what is not clear to me, and we'll come back to Sanjoy, and this is, would the state government actually need to be dismissed, or would it be, as the Law Commission said, that you change the term, the life term or the tenure of the assembly? You don't actually dismiss it. But it's a technical question. Anurag, let's bring in a political perspective. It is complicated. Sanjoy Ghosh says it can be done in 5 days. So we all stand corrected. It can be done in 5 days. Is there advantage to the Modi government in doing it? Politically, why would it want to do it?
Well, absolutely, and the advantage lies in the headline clincher, Barkha. If you see this, it's a classic case of what can be the result of a Rahul versus Modi. When Rahul Gandhi comes and says, "I'm going to speak about Adani, please set up your mics," and then you have a headline clincher, and nobody talks about that anymore. So it's very clear that when Modi comes, he's like a juggernaut. He takes away everything. There's no other discussion apart from Modi. So if it is a one nation, one election, they're going to sweep all the elections, all the assembly polls, the assembly. I mean, when I speak the assembly polls, I'm not literally meaning it in terms of number, but they're going to make a large impact in the areas, even like states like Tamil Nadu, where they're trying hard, even states like Telangana, where they're trying hard. They might get healthy numbers in the assembly, and that sets up the tone for the future. So it is politically a big advantage for the BJP. But in fact, my electoral and my parliamentary knowledge also told me that, state ratification is required. But if it is not required, as a gentleman told, then I think we are looking at a totally different picture.
Yeah, Sanjoy Ghosh is Well, he's the only lawyer on the panel, so I think we should all defer to. I think we should all
But
defer to his understanding.
I think politically, Barkha, politically also, it is not a very convenient gesture for Modi government to go for an early election, because then the opposition also, claims that one-upmanship, telling that we have made the government to go for an early polls because we were gearing up with some strategy and the project management.
So
And they were,
Anurag, that's exactly the poster that the Congress actually released today. Let me show you two
That's right.
posters before I come back to Dilip. First is the poster released by the Congress party, where it shows an image. Can we go full frame to that image? Yes, and take the banner off so we can see it properly. There's the image which says "Dar inko lagta hai, gala inka sukta hai," showing the Prime Minister reaching for a glass of water. But the BJP had its own answer. The BJP answering Rahul's points about Adani showed this picture of Rahul Gandhi, presenting him almost as a sort of under trial, throwing corruption allegation back at him, and this rather funny poster, I have to say, calling Nitish Kumar Oppenheimer, which is of course a play on Oppenheimer and Nitish Kumar's frequent changes in political parties. All right, let's go to Dilip Cherian. Dilip, with Sanjoy Ghosh's argument that state assembly ratification is not needed, would you have a rethink that this session is for the women's reservation bill? Are you a little more convinced or not really?
I'm not really more convinced, honestly. Sanjoy, I'm happy to hear the technicality which you argued, and that does make legal sense, and I'm not countering that. I'm only saying that, is this likely to make me more convinced that this is what's about to happen? No, I'm not. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is that the Modi government may want to, as Aditi said a little while ago, do with this parliament session and not have to do a session for a while, for one more reason. And the reason is that after the state elections that are coming up, their level of control of the Rajya Sabha gets reduced if current projections of what happens with state governments is likely to happen. So what I'm saying is that the level of control of the Rajya Sabha will go down further, and that might be a reason to push certain things through just now before the state elections.
I think that's a very compelling point, that you're basically saying if there are any key legislations, polls suggest that the government will, the incumbent central government, the BJP, will not do well in the state assembly elections. So they're looking to maybe push through legislations they want to. Let's think about that politically.
And also show off the new parliament building before the state elections.
Okay, Sanjoy, a technical question for you, and then we look at the politics of what Dilip has raised. Aditi Phadnis said, in any case, you can't just dismiss state governments. Sandip Ghosh also had a technical question, but you wouldn't technically be dismissing the government. You'd be saying, hello, your assembly is now 6 years, or hello, your assembly is now 4 years. Will that still count as, will you still need president's rule to do that? Technical question only.
You're absolutely right. It will not be dismissing the assembly then. If they amend the constitution and they change the term of the assembly is in Article 172, incidentally, and the term of the parliament is in Article 83. If they simply if they simply say that for the purposes of an assembly whose term expires beyond January 2024, as a one-time measure, that term shall be deemed to be restricted to the date of December or date of 31st December, and it shall be deemed to expire on 31st December as a one-time amendment, they can do it. And then it is not a dismissing of the assembly, it's why constitution itself has limited the term of
and that would also not need the ratification of any state assembly.
No, it would not. That, unfortunately, so trust me, I've been trying very hard to find a ratification argument, but unfortunately, read Article 368, Clause 2, which deals with the circumstances. For example, if you are tinkering with the list, the schedule, the list, the lawmaking, legislation powers, power of the president, the right of a state, yes, executive rights, yes, but the assembly, strangely, has not been accepted as a.
So let me summarize what you're saying. You're basically saying, and then I'm coming to you, Sandip Ghosh and Aditi Phadnis. You're basically saying, Sanjoy Ghosh, that in 5 days, this is all technical, it's all hypothetical. Dilip is not convinced, Aditi is not convinced. They're saying maybe they just don't want their Rajya Sabha numbers to go down. They just want to get their legislation through before they enter campaign mode. Very possible. But technically, you're saying in 5 days, if the government so chooses, they can bring in constitutional amendments that don't need state ratification to basically pass a law on one nation, one election. They can then also pass an amendment that changes the life of an assembly, which is currently 5 years. They can reduce that or increase that. But Sanjoy, I'm still not convinced that uniformly doing that would bring them the synchronicity that they actually need. It is kind of complicated. Sandip Ghosh, let's bring you in. Obviously, the Modi government likes shock and awe. And the final answer could be just something completely unrelated to what we're talking about. And maybe that's the point, that you just get for 3 weeks everybody to say, kya hone wala hai, kya hone wala hai, kya hone wala hai, and talk about nothing else. The India Alliance today has, released all their committees. They haven't named a convener. They haven't named a leader. But there's going to be very little talk about that today.
Let's see, Barkha, politically, I nowadays don't comment, don't describe myself as a political commentator.
Sure.
But you see, I don't see, I think any of these options can actually cause a major backlash for the Modi government, so, also in terms of optics and otherwise. So I don't, in my common judgment, trying to either postpone the elections or bring it forward or try to dissolve the assemblies or any of that, it's going to be bad optics. Secondly, it can create a lot of political backlash, give ammunition to the opposition to take on the government, oppose these moves, saying that again we are moving towards some kind of a dictatorship, or they are trying to avoid elections and all that kind of stuff. And therefore, I am very, very skeptical whether they would try to do anything as drastic or dramatic as that. UCC trying to push through is still a stronger case, and trying to push it further and then say, oh, we wanted to do it, they didn't allow us to do it, or even women's bill, etc. But I don't see they're trying to push something like one nation, one poll, or some agenda like that at this juncture, because that's going to be so. What Aditi said in the beginning, one point we've sort of lost in the thread is about China and foreign policy. These could be also serious points of discussion, which the Modi government, everything else, G20, they can talk about it, as Dilip said, in a speech or address or something like that. But things like China, they need to take to the parliament. If they don't, that itself is going to nag them up to the next election. Rahul Gandhi will keep on saying that, you're afraid of China, you're not. So all of that, I think those are more tactical things.
I think despite Sanjoy explaining the legality and the technicality, the politics, other than Anurag, nobody's that convinced that there's gain. Though, Aditi, there have been surveys, and we played one of them. The IDFC had an interesting report that showed that if you actually club a state and a national election, the chances are that people tend to vote for a strong central government. 77% voters will choose the same party or alliance that's in the state and the center if the elections are held together. So maybe it's psychological, because here, actually, whether it's Rajasthan or Karnataka or Delhi, we have evidence that voters, Aditi, can vote very differently because the elections are held separately. But surveys seem to suggest that psychological play could change if elections are held together. So there is some political advantage to an incumbent, strong, popular government. But Aditi, let me bring you in on what you think. Aditi?
So one thing is, first of all, there is as much evidence to suggest people will vote the same way if elections are held simultaneously, as there is to suggest that people will vote very differently when elections are held. Odisha is an example before us. That's number one. Number two, I just want to point out that Rajya Sabha and state elections, or the outcome in state elections and elections in Rajya Sabha, or the composition of Rajya Sabha, do not segue seamlessly into one another. There's a long gap between Rajya Sabha elections and the outcome in a state assembly election. So it will take time before Rajya Sabha elections, as we know, every 6 years, a third of the members retire, and it takes time for Rajya Sabha's composition to change. We've seen that in the current Rajya Sabha as well. As far as the politics of it is concerned, I'm really not sure how much a joint, uniform election, one nation, one poll, will really affect the Modi government's outcome if elections are held together. I'm not sure at all, and it's something that we have to discuss.
Yeah. Anurag, since you're the only one convinced that this might be the way in which the government is moving, tell us why you're so convinced.
No. I'm not saying that I strongly believe, that there's going to be a one nation, one election. But I would love to see a one nation, one election, because both economically and socially, it is in the interest of India and the common citizen. But Barkha, I also want to, one very interesting fact that actually came to my mind, and probably I would like to have Dilip's opinion also on that, is what I've seen with this government is, although there is a chatter that, if there is a one nation, one election, if they push it, they need to bulldoze all the state government, they need to kind of, dismiss the chief minister and all that. But, there is also a phenomena, what I've seen, the optics. Whenever this Jammu Kashmir article was removed, whenever Mr. Amit Shah brings a bill, the muscle flexing makes the government look even heavier. And there is a big kind of, when the optics are, the muscle flexing, people of India, particularly the youth of India, they love it. Or people of India are...
Unlike Sandip Ghosh, who thinks the optics are bad, you actually think strongman governments have approval.
I mean, that's what people
ratings.
are buying into it. I mean, Dilip can comment.
Sandip,
but
Ghosh,
I get a sense that...
Sandip, can I get Sandip?
Sense that people
Sandip's
are
a
buying
point.
into it.
Okay, Sandip Ghosh briefly, and then I need to start wrapping up. Sandip Ghosh briefly.
See,
Sandip Ghosh.
Barkha, there is a difference between removing Article 370, etc., and doing this. What I meant is, not a strong government, you will have politically, it will give a lot of ammunition to the opposition, especially in today's context, to create a stir against the government. They are not going to take it easily. They know the risks. Although Aditi says, I totally agree with her about the Orissa case, but opposition at this moment may not be confident that in case of a one nation, one poll, it will improve their prospects. They stand better chance of having these states separately fought. If they win Rajasthan, win Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, in any case, they'll probably win. They will be further bolstered to go there. So I don't think it's in their interest. And if Modi does this, they will have another card to play to say that, the government is on the back foot. So that is what I mentioned there.
Let me bring in Sanjoy just again on a technical point, since Jammu and Kashmir was mentioned. In fact, the only legal point right now before the Supreme Court is to decide whether the Assembly's consent was necessary, Sanjoy Ghosh, before this was done. But I think everyone's absolutely right to say you just cannot conflate Kashmir, where the temporary nature of 370 is written into the Constitution, with uniform polls, which, by the way, used to be held till 1967.
Absolutely. So, no, absolutely. See, there are two issues here. One is whether it's legal and whether it's constitutionally moral. The same issue is also in the Jammu Kashmir case, that whether you can say that the Kashmir, because it's under governor's rule or president's rule at that time, is represented by the governor or the lieutenant governor, whoever you've created, whether his consent is the consent of the people of Kashmir. So even this, technically, constitutionally, it may be done, but whether it can be steamrolled without the actual consultation of the states and all political parties being on board like they were on GST is an issue which you really have to think in the political sense. Another thing, though I'm going out of the constitutional remit, please also keep in mind the electoral bonds case still has not been decided by the Supreme Court. 3,600 crores is with one party, and there's no gainsaying as to which party will be in an advantage if they have to spend a budget on central and state elections together, and which are the parties which will be at a disadvantage. So that's the elephant in the room also. Keep that in mind.
Interesting. Before I give Dilip Cherian the last word, something we haven't directly addressed, the rumors of an earlier election, not an early election, but an earlier election. It was, of course, pointed out that no government actually wants to give up power early. Point two, there's the Ram Mandir sort of inauguration in January. Why would the government want to bypass that? But Aditi, any thoughts on that?
I don't think there's going to be an early election. I don't think this special session has been called. First of all, no special session is required. No parliamentary session is required to announce an early election. In any case, politically, I don't think it suits the government.
Dilip, Cherian, last word then. Do we come back to where we started, women's reservation bill, or just maybe G20? Is it going to be something mundane in the end? No shock and awe?
The shock and all that was already produced by the fact that the Prime Minister, the government made this announcement about the special session. There's a little undertone which, everybody thinks that I'm just an image person, but I also do a lot of policy work. The interesting thing in the policy side is that in the evening of this announcement, there was a major reshuffle of secretaries to the government of India. What does that mean? Does that mean that government is gearing up for the last mile delivery before elections and wants to sort of do the ramp up? As Aditi says, even though no days may be lost, the fact that you want to make a whole bunch of policy announcements and say to the country that we are now geared, this is our delivery before we, as we enter Amrit Kal or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think there's so much to think about. And the bottom line, quite simply, is that we simply do not know. We're all guessing. Some of us are making educated guesses.
Only one point, Dilip. I don't know, again, it may not be significant at all, is in part of the announcement, they have talked of deliberations. We expect the opposition to participate in deliberations. Whether there'll be anything offered for deliberation or not, it's still a matter of anybody's guess, but that line was added very specifically. So are they going to therefore actually introduce a bill where there is deliberation required? Anybody's guess, as Barkha said, and let's wait.
Yeah, let's wait. Just another 3 weeks. We should know before the 18th of September. Sanjoy has explained that technically the one nation, one election is possible. Politically, nobody here on this program is convinced. We've heard other options from G20 to women's reservation bill. UCC, I think, is a little more complex. I think that some of their own voters might be also impacted by it. So I'm not very convinced about that. Thank you. It's been illuminating, interesting, and the suspense is alive. And let's see. Watch the space, as they say. Sanjoy, Sandip, to Anurag, to Dilip, and to Aditi. A pleasure. And to our audience, thank you as ever. See you tomorrow. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.